I know there are some Dhamma talks that everybody can relate to, right? Dhamma talks about like maybe how to work with uncertainty or how to just sit with and observe our dukkha, our suffering. And tonight's Dhamma talk will probably not be one of those Dhamma talks that are universally relatable because the topic for tonight is how to work with devas. And for my friends who will be watching this who maybe don't know all the Pali terms, I mean how to work with heavenly beings like angels and other spirits. So I'm just so happy to be talking about this, and the Devas are too. And I wanted to talk about why I wanted to talk about this. One of the reasons is because toward the end of last year, at the end of 2025, IS and Tusika would talk about feeding your demons a lot. That process of facing our suffering and using our intuition to really see it through and learn from our suffering. And every time she brought it up, I could feel slash hear the devas fluttering with excitement because feeding your demons and processes like that do two things. One, it helps us quiet the noise in our minds. Every time we do it, the noise of our minds gets a little more and more quiet, and that allows us to hear the devas better and better. And feeding your demons and other practices similar to it also strengthen our intuition. And of course, the more our intuition strengthens, then the better we can connect with devas. And yeah, every single time, I could hear this flutter of excitement because they want to be known by us practitioners. They want to be known by us humans. And it can be such a fun connection, fun and rewarding. When I think about this relationship with the devas and all the guidance and encouragement I've received from them in practice, not to mention all the fun. Um, I think of if I had practiced all this time without their support, it would have been like climbing up a really steep, tall mountain with one arm tied behind my back. And actually, the complete thought to that is without the devas, it would have been like one arm tied behind my back. Without the tools of Western psychology and therapy and all that, would have been like another arm tied behind my back. And without attuning to the wisdom of the body and my nervous system, would have been like climbing that mountain with my legs tied together from ankle all the way up to the hip. So imagine practicing without all three of those tools would be like just an inchworm up that tall, tall, tall mountain. So let's use all the tools that we can and have fun along the way because Davis can be very fun. Okay, here I keep saying that, so I better give you a couple examples. Okay, so one is a story that comes up for me is sometime during like 2020 or 2021, there were these fires in Northern California, and there were a couple weeks in a row where we couldn't go outside. The air was very smoky, the sky was red, it was like ash falling down from the skies. And I remember I called the Ayas one day and just was weeping from anxiety because at the time I wasn't able to sit still as much as I can now. So I just couldn't, it was agonizing to be trapped in our little one bedroom apartment at the time. But I also couldn't leave the apartment because just to breathe in a breath of air was just felt toxic and felt poisonous in my body. And even to take out the trash, I would take one deep breath in my house and then speed walk to the dumpster and speed walk back into the house and then finally let go of that breath. Ugh, those were dark times, literally. Anyway, so I was talking to the Ayas and I was expressing all this anxiety and how I felt so trapped at home and how I really just wanted to be able to leave, but I couldn't. And they gave me some really valuable encouragement, of course. But just as a fun extra Deva cherry on top, the next day when I went to take out the trash and I was approaching the dumpster to throw our bags in, I saw leaning against the dumpster was a brand new respirator, which is one of those masks you can wear that filters the air. And it had the air cartridges included in it, and the package was brand spanking new. And it just felt like a little more than a coincidence. And I remember emailing Aya Chichinanda, like, oh my gosh, guess what happened? And she was like, yeah, you better call your nuns more. So that's one fun story that I really felt like was a big green flag and developed a lot of my faith and confidence in the Devas. And I'll tell you one more quick anecdote is okay, so a couple years ago, I was taking a little break from KBV, which is one thing I really love about this community, that people are free to take a break and free and welcomed when they return. And I was just, looking for answers and practicing in a way that just needed to be elsewhere for a while. And even though I was taking a break, I really felt this yearning in my heart to be in a practice group. And I had some very specific ideas about what I wanted this group to look like. So I wanted like a specific number of people, and I wanted it to be in person. So it had to be somewhere around the Bay Area, and wanted to be Theravada tradition and all this other stuff. And one day I really scoured the internet and could not find anything that fit. So I just got a little dejected and gave up. But then that night, I had a dream where I was coming to this meditation center that I did not recognize. And it was a little early before whatever meditation group was going to be meeting there. So there was this woman who, again, I did not recognize, and she was setting up all the cushions and sweeping. And I started talking to her. She started asking me about what kind of meditation group I was looking for, and I told her exactly what. And then she just turned to me in this dream and she said, look up these two search terms. And she said it again very clearly. And as soon as she said it again very clearly, I woke up from the dream. And it was very early morning at that point, but I rolled out of bed and just kept rolling onto my office chair and opened up Google and looked up those two terms. And it turned out that there was exactly the kind of group I was looking for. And the application was closing soon, and I managed to get into the group, and I had a very meaningful and rewarding experience there. And that was also like, okay, wow, thank you. So those are the kind of things that may happen as we build and strengthen our relationship with the Devas. So those are some good reasons to practice in this way. But I also wanted to talk about some reasons why it's not so important to ever develop that relationship, because it's not critical, it's not required to do this in order to awaken and even in order to get all the way down to the end of the path. And as I understand it, Venerable Sariputta, one of the Buddha's chief disciples, was famously non psychic. But he was extremely skilled in teaching and speaking about the Dhamma. And if I had to guess, probably after the Buddha's name in the Pali Canon, his probably appears the second most often. So just think of how well we can practice and what an amazing impact we can make on the whole world without having an ounce of psychic ability. So also, in a way, it doesn't matter at all. Sorry, Devas. And yeah, I think even the belief in Devas, like that literally, is not even critical. I think I've met people who I feel very confident that they're pretty far along the path. And when they talk about their belief in Devas, for example, there's this really beautiful humility with which they speak, where they just say, like, yeah, I think it could very well be true, and I don't know. And that humility, I think, is so beautiful and so touching, and also makes sense given especially the Western conditioning of how organized religion and how spiritual beings have been wielded by those in power to oppress and dominate other people and as tools of cruelty, really. So I think, especially in the Western mind, it just also just makes a lot of sense that people are hesitant to cling on to that. And I think there is a lot of wisdom in holding that lightly also. And then did want to share some tools and methods with which we could use to connect with the Devas. But one more thing I want to share before I get to that is I think some other reasons why, especially the modern Western mind, is not super primed for connecting with Devas. So one reason is okay, like I remember the movie A Beautiful Mind came out in my formative years in my youth. And I remember watching it and learning about what schizophrenia was. And because of the way the movie was plotted and performed and everything, I remember watching it as a kid and just being like, oh my God, may I never, ever, ever see anything that isn't materially there. And there is, I think, a lot of stigma around people who see things. And even now, like me talking about this and knowing that it's going to be on the permanent record of YouTube, I would feel better if everybody knew that I am capable of holding, just standard office jobs, and I have high executive functioning abilities, and I am typically early on every deadline and under on every budget. And I'm basically saying I have both feet grounded in conventional reality as well. So that I think that's one reason why it's harder for the modern Western mind to see and interact and be open to devas. Another is I think that the modern Western mind is very occupied with logistical conventional matters. And in the times and the seasons in my life when I am the most occupied with logistical conventional matters, like I'm just not going to be able to talk with the devas. It just requires an openness and spaciousness that is the antithesis of that busy planning mind. There's some other reasons too, but you get the gist. It's just a different time. It's also a different world. When I read about the world that Ajahn Mun grew up in and practiced in, a cave in the mountains, of course the Devas are going to hang out there more. Uh, I mean, just as a person, I don't like the sound of jackhammers and construction and radios and traffic. Like, if I walk down the street and I hear a jackhammer, I'm going to turn 180 degrees around and walk back to where I came from. And Devas are even more sensitive than us humans. So uh, they're going to find other ways to talk to us. Like I work from home, Devas work from home. They work from their dimension. And I'll get into the methods in a second. But okay, so let's talk about the methods. I'm going to start with the most classic and traditional. So the most classic and traditional way I think for people to communicate with devas is to drop into meditation. And the way I think of where to go and what depth of meditation to go to is right around fourth jhana. Because before fourth jhana, like one, two, three, I feel like the conscious mind is still a little too present and is still like blocking that channel. And then after fourth jhana, like five, six, seven, eight, the mind is kind of just too far in outer space for anyone to connect with us. So the method would be to just hold the intention in the back of the brain and then just go into meditation and see if anybody's there. And it might take a few tries, especially if the mind has a lot of doubt. But a couple of things you might try are to first keep trying. Don't just try it once and give up. Maybe try a few times. Uh, Also, approach with an attitude of playfulness and experimentation, curiosity, discovery. Um, Something else that might help is if you have a specific question or something specific that you're wondering and you want to consult the Devas on, that's always a good strategy, right? When dealing with someone and you want a meaningful conversation, it's like to go into it knowing how to guide that conversation. It can be useful. So an analogy I used for how to hold that in the back of the brain, I was thinking about how to explain that is I remember at Wat Sumptawee when we all got in lunch line and there were like hundreds of people in line for the food. And of course, the nuns went first and then the monks, and then according to precepts, people would line up. So often before we got to the food, there would be hundreds of people that already passed and maybe took the choicest bits sometimes. But in the back of my brain, I always thought, gosh, I hope they have some papaya today, because that was one of my favorite things to eat in Thailand. And by the way, if people are judging papaya only based on what's available in United States markets, like that is not an accurate representation of how delicious papaya can be. So anyway, I would just hold that thought in the back of my brain. But of course, as I went through the line, I was happy to get whatever I got, and whatever was there, I just really gratefully received and put in my bowl. And if there was papaya, then awesome. I was very happy about that. And if there was no papaya, also like, wow, like look at all this that is available and all these gifts from all the people in the village and all the people at the monastery. So in the same way, we can bring that intention into meditation, where if we happen to meet a deva or two in our meditation, so super awesome and fun. And also, if not, then we have a wonderful meditation anyway. And actually, that reminds me another reason why I think our or my experience, I'll just keep it to myself. My experience of the Devas is really different from what I read from Ajahn Mun, is that people's brains are also just wired differently. And some people are able to see very vivid images. And I actually learned the term for this recently. It's called hyperphantasia, I think, if I remember correctly, where they can just see things when they close their eyes, when they go into meditation, they see things in such vivid detail that it's indistinguishable from having your eyes open and just looking around in conventional reality. And it's a whole spectrum all the way to the other end where it's called aphantasia, I think, where when people close their eyes, they are not able to conjure even the face of the person they love the most. And then, of course, there's the spectrum in between. So I imagine someone with hyperphantasia would probably be able to see the devas in much higher definition. People with aphantasia may be able to hear them better instead of seeing them, or may have other psychic abilities or psychic ways to communicate with the devas, like gut feelings or hunches, but without seeing who they're communicating with exactly. And then in between, I would say that's where I am at. So sometimes when I see images of devas, it's like a really blurry outline. So I can kind of make out who I'm talking to, but I don't see any distinguishing features on their face. And it's quite similar to if I were to stare at an object in bright light for a few seconds and then close my eyes, and then I'm able to see the outline of that object. So it's kind of that same feeling. And then sometimes, you might see them as a crowd, you might just hear something, you might suddenly just have a deep knowing of something. There's many, many different ways to communicate. And in fact, some of you might already be communicating with the devas already and just don't really know that it's them. And I hear this from practitioners sometimes when they say something like, "Oh yeah, I was in meditation or I was just walking along, and suddenly I just heard, I was like pondering some question, or I was just noticing something, reflecting on something, and then I just heard this voice, just so loud and clear. It didn't sound like my voice, but I just knew that it was good, and I knew it was true, and I knew it was pointing me in the right direction. And I think I actually heard that voice the night that I met Kyle. I was really going back and forth whether or not to go to the event where I met my partner. And I heard loud and clear in my mind, did not sound like my voice. It just said, go. So I went. And that's where I met Kyle. And yeah, I hear this sometimes from practitioners. And if they don't ask me, I don't say anything. But sometimes I just go in my mind, hee hee hee. Maybe it was the Devas. And yeah, might already be happening. Another way of talking to the Devas is to go through spiritual hypnosis. And this is a way that some people can access seeing their past lives in great detail. Some people can also be guided to a heaven realm and meet their Devas there and ask directly any questions they have about their life. In my experience, okay, so plus and caution with this. So the plus of this is that even people who do not have a lot of meditation experience are able to access that state of hypnosis. Not 100% of the time, but with a skilled facilitator, pretty darn close to 100. The caution is that when you hire someone to do this, you are letting them into some of the deepest parts of your mind, like really, truly some of the deepest. And if that person that you hired is not super strong and stable in their ethical conduct, it could yield undesired results. So please be particular if you ever go about that route. Um, a lot of them offer like a 15-minute intro call, which I don't think is enough to suss out if someone has strong sila or not. It might be better if you know that person personally or if you know someone who's had a really great experience with them. So it could be awesome, and also proceed carefully. All right. And then another way that one could work with devas is in our dreams, when the conscious mind is asleep and the subconscious can come out to play. And one way that people can do this, one way that I do this sometimes too, is upon sleeping, just if there's something that you're mulling over, something you're kind of trying to work out in your practice, you can just hold that in the back of your mind. And I would really encourage that question to be specific and to be clear, and just one. Okay, so not a list of 15, just one question, and just go to sleep and see if any clarity comes in your dreams. And sometimes it can be really literal, like a stranger at a meditation center telling you what search terms to look up to find a meditation group you want to hang out with. But sometimes there can be a lot of symbolism. Mm. So pay attention to what feelings come up in the dream and what the seemingly random objects sometimes in the dream can actually stand for in significant ways in real life. Okay, those are the four ways that we might use to talk with the devas that I had in my head just now. I think there's one more way I want to bring up that is not for us to talk to the devas, but it is a way for the devas to talk to us. And it's said, I've heard it been said in this tradition before, that devas can influence our minds, with metta and always to do good, right? So if you ever feel like there's a voice telling you to do things that are not good, that is the time to go talk to a doctor. But they can influence our minds to do good. And I've really experienced this from other people where So for example, like one day I was driving to work and had this dilemma about what to do in terms of practice. And I was using really specific language to describe um, what I wanted to do or not, and the reasons I wanted to do it or not do it. And I really couldn't make a decision. I was going back and forth. I was really right on the fence. But then later, I had this meeting where one of my colleagues came up after the meeting and said something that was eerily using exactly the phrases I was using in my head that morning, said one sentence with the the wording that I was using just that morning that was really oddly specific and kind of random. And in that moment made it instantly clear how I needed to proceed. And I was like, okay, thanks, Davis. And sometimes when this happens, I hear it in what I call in my head Deva voice. And it just sounds like someone's voice has like a little more reverberation to it, and it cuts through the noise of the room in a very specific way, almost like what they're saying has been underlined a few times. And that has happened a couple times to me where something was just eerily spot on to the language I was using in my head and just suddenly made it very clear what I needed to do, or just cut through some dilemma exactly down the middle and made it very clear. And those instances are a little too intimate to share on the permanent record of YouTube. So I'm going to tell you a story of one time when I guess somebody gave me the feedback that they thought it was happening, where I was used as Deva voice for them. So this was happening when a friend of mine was moving home, back to our hometown, our childhood hometown, and I was not much of a baker. I still am not, but one day I just randomly decided to make banana bread. And when I had this giant loaf of banana bread at the end, I didn't know what to do with it. I certainly was not going to eat it all by myself. So I decided to drop it off at my friend's parents' house because I knew she was arriving the next day. And I thought how lovely it would be if she got home and there was some freshly baked bread from her good friend. This is not something I did on the regular at all. I did not talk to her parents on the regular, did not bake on the regular. Like this, all this was really atypical behavior for me. But when I knocked on my friend's door and her parents answered, all of a sudden I have no idea why, but they just started sharing with me all the reasons why they were really worried and anxious about um, my friend coming back home. And as I listened, I just tried to be there for them and also just offered them whatever I could from my experience of moving back home after college. And they had this look on their face all of a sudden as we were talking that they were like, this is not, there's something kind of weird about this situation. And they started telling me, like, oh my God, you're an angel, you're an angel. And I was definitely like, no, I'm not. I am a human being that farts like every other human being. But looking back, at the moment, I just thought it was really odd that they would say that even. But looking back, I think, oh, okay, maybe I was a meat puppet basically for a deva, which kind of cool. All right. I wanted to share some best practices when it comes to working with devas. And one is just a caution, like not to overinterpret anything that you get from the devas. So this can happen really easily, especially if someone really wants a certain outcome or a certain thing to happen in the future. Like we get a little green flag and we just run with it. So one example is I have this, I noticed a pattern in my dreams where if I suddenly have many nights in a row, I have these really vivid dreams of people just having a really good time solving problems creatively and collaboratively. I have noticed that it tends to mean that I'm going to join a new group, whether it's like a writer's group or another Dhamma group or something, and it's going to be really fun. And there was a time at a previous work situation where I was pretty disgruntled about work, and I started having these dreams all in a row of just people having a lot of fun working together. And now, knowing what I know now, I would have had those dreams and just been like, okay, cool, something's going to happen where I'm going to have a lot of fun working with people. Or I'm going to have a lot of fun in community. Awesome. But back then, I overinterpreted those dreams to be like, oh my gosh, that means I am out of this job and I'm going to be able to start something that's obviously going to be way better paid and way more exciting. And I'm going to be like, see you later, suckers, to my current job. So that's not what happened. So what actually happened was that just some things had to shift at that current job so that I could really enjoy that team and really enjoy that job again. And actually, what had to shift was my attitude. So, haha at me. So, yeah, don't overinterpret. Just take it at face value. Take it as a little green flag, a little bit of encouragement. And yeah. Okay. Other caution is sometimes you might pick up some information about what's happening for someone else, like maybe what someone else is going through or what someone else is thinking or feeling. And I would really recommend, if this happens, that you just keep it to yourself. Um, I mean, like, imagine going up to someone and then telling them their innermost thoughts or feelings. Like, that's just not going to go over well. Even if, first of all, we might be wrong, right? Like, these messages get misinterpreted sometimes, and I think it's wise to hold them lightly and humbly and just know that we might be wrong at any time. And then also, if you might be right, that could lead to undesired results because imagine going up to someone and telling them their social security number, right? That's basically what's happening if you go up to someone and tell them what they're thinking and feeling. Um, it's not going to go over well. And even if you are right, sometimes that person is not ready to hear it, or that person may not even be conscious of something that is happening at a really deep level, and that's also not going to yield good results. So, one example of this is when I was a lot younger, I had just undergone an episode of trauma. And for a year and a half after that was quite depressed and had a lot of unprocessed anger that I just was not ready to face. I think if it was just too big for me to even admit that it was there. So it just like kind of dragged it behind me wherever I went, not looking at it. Um, but there was this someone who I became an acquaintance, and one day we were hanging out, and he was just like, Grace, you have a lot of anger. And the way I responded was not like, oh my gosh, thank you. Now let me process that. It was more like, no, I don't. So, yeah, in almost every single case, I would highly recommend if you pick up some information about someone else, just keep it to yourself. The one exception to this is that if you go into samadhi and every time you sink into samadhi, you just hear the angels yelling at you to tell that person, that is the one exception, I think. But, you know, be really careful because sometimes the conscious mind. So, okay, so in the past, when that happened to me, and I actually did end up telling that person, in my conscious mind, I really did not want to, and it felt like the thing to tell that person was like too big of a statement to make. But every time I sat in meditation, like as soon as I went into even the slightest bit of samadhi, I just heard like this roar, like, oh my God, tell her, tell her. So that's when I told her. And it turned out to be good. Good thing. Yeah. Received really well. So yeah, it's always a dice roll, but it worked out well in that time. Okay, other good practices is, yeah, just to hold all of it so lightly. Uh, I think it's really fun to talk about devas, and of course, very fun to connect with them personally, and could be very fun for anyone who wants to try it to develop a relationship as well. And gosh, it is just not another thing to grasp onto, okay? And like, I know that the people on this call have a strong enough practice, so you wouldn't anyway. But so the thing I think a good comparison for working with devas is like if practice is like running a marathon, which it's not a race, but there is a finish line. So in that way, it's kind of like running a marathon. I have never run a marathon and I never plan to run a marathon. But as I understand it, as you run, there are people who gather on the sides of the path and they throw energy bars at you, or they hand you little cups of water, or they hold signs and they cheer for you to keep going. So those are like the devas. The devas are there to give us the drink and give us the snack. And the wise thing to do is just to take that refreshment and keep on running, and not to stop and ask, where are you from? What is your name? And et cetera, et cetera. I think sometimes I have noticed on occasion that people do get caught in that trap of becoming a little consumed with exactly where an intuition is coming from, or uh, you know, I'm sure I'm sure we have all seen that happen sometimes. And when I see that, of course, I don't say anything out loud, and it's none of my business, honestly. Only my practice is my business. And I will admit, there is a little part of my brain that goes, what are you doing? The finish line is that way. Keep going. And yeah, like is it the devas or is it our subconscious? Is it my intuition? Is it my enlightened self? Is it whatever? I don't know. Tomato, tomato, really. Like if it's a message or a signal of goodness, and if it yields good results, then who the heck cares what it is and where it comes from? Just take the green flag for what it is, the encouragement for what it is, the guidance to do good and be brave for what it is, and just keep on going. And then I think the last thing for now to say is what delights the devas and what attracts the devas. Of course, is our goodness and our good practice, our deep practice, our dedication, our courage to face our fears and to face our dukkha and see them all the way through. And it's just like how people, when they watch movies and TV, right? Sometimes characters do a certain thing and it just makes you want to clap. It's the same thing with the devas. We can behave in a way that makes the devas just want to clap and makes them want to tell their deva friends, like, oh my gosh, come check out this practitioner over here. Let's root for them together. And it's, in movies and TV, it's like when a knight slays a dragon, right? So in our practice, the equivalent would be when we slay the dragon of our kilesas. Uh, oh my gosh, me and Kyle, we went through some really rich, challenging practice this weekend. And when we found level ground again, I was like, oh my gosh, Kyle, I think we just slayed a dragon together. And that's what it feels like sometimes, isn't it? But also not just that, right? When people offer mercy to each other when they have every reason not to, when people love each other even when it's extremely inconvenient, when people break generational curses, break lifelong or many lives long conditioning, and choose freedom instead. I think that's what makes the Devas want to stand up and clap. All right, let's sit for a few minutes and then we can discuss.